So, welcome everybody to our OLLI program. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Yvonne Kason, who's going to be our speaker today. And I'm just going to read a little bit about Yvonne. Dr. Yvonne Kason is the president and founder of Spiritual Awakenings International, as well as past president of the International Association for Near-Death Studies. Spiritual Awakenings International is a nonprofit organization dedicated to raising awareness about all types of spiritually transformative experiences, STEs. Dr. Kason first coined the term spiritually transformative experiences in 1994. Dr. Kason has had 5 near-death experiences in her childhood, 2 in her childhood, and 3 in her adult life, as well as multiple spiritually transformative experiences of many kinds. Dr. Yvonne Kason is a retired family physician and an MD psychotherapist, previously on faculty at the University of Toronto, and an internationally renowned expert on near-death experiences, Kundalini awakenings, and other spiritually transformative experiences. In 1990, Dr. Kason was the first Canadian medical doctor to specialize her medical practice in researching and counseling patients with diverse types of STEs. She has over 40 years experience counseling NDEs, STE experiencers. And I am so thrilled to have you here with us today, Dr. Yvonne Kason. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm going to screen share now, and I'll be screen sharing during the presentation, and I will be happy to answer your questions at the end. So yes, I'm Dr. Yvonne Kason. I'm the president of Spiritual Awakenings International, and I've also have had 5 near-death experiences, as Catherine mentioned. So these are my 2 latest books, Touched by the Light and Soul Lessons from the Light. So if you decide after hearing me today that you would like to learn more, Touched by the Light is a deep dive into all types of spiritually transformative experiences. And I give over 100 case examples of different types of STEs in that book different people had. Whereas Soul Lessons on the Light is actually my biography. It's the story of my own spiritual awakening process and journey. And I just want to say before I go into the talk that I'm very proud, and I just want to say it for this audience, that my work in the last 45 years and also my books and this talk is multi-faith in perspective, that I think it's very important that we umbrella all different faith traditions with spiritually transformative experiences, and so I do. Although I often use vocabulary from the yogic tradition because I found it very helpful, and also from my own Judeo-Christian upbringing, spiritually transformative experiences is an umbrella term for anyone of any faith tradition. Now, how did I get interested in near-death experiences and spiritually transformative experiences? Well, I look at it as the divine plan, because when I was in medical school getting my worldly medical training, it seems invisibly on the other side, the divine was giving me spiritual training by giving me spiritually transformative experiences. And it started when I was in medical school at the age of 23. And I took a meditation course that was at the university, and it was advertised that it would help people study better, do better in their exams. So I took it to help me study and be relaxed for my exams. Well, much to my surprise, when I'd been meditating for about 3 months regularly, all of a sudden I had this incredible, powerful experience that I now know was a Kundalini awakening. I didn't know that, I didn't have a word to describe this experience for many years, but I now know I had a Kundalini awakening at 23 when I was in medical school. And what I experienced when I was meditating that day was that while I was deep in meditation, I was doing a visualization where I was visualizing a lotus at the top of my head. I'd been taught that technique, and I was radiating love out from my heart. That was the particular technique I'd been taught. And all of a sudden, I heard this inner roar, like the roar of a waterfalls. And I felt this powerful rush of energy go up my spine and out through the top of the head. And I felt myself rise above my body and expand. It's like I transformed into this really large force field of love. I now realize it was my first mystical experience. But I had no idea what this was. I was still in medical school, so I tried to sort of push it aside, focus on my studies. Well, a few years later, when I was already a young doctor at the age of 26, I had another powerful experience. The good Lord was trying to show me this is what we want you to do in the future, Yvonne. You're going to be dealing with this. I had a powerful near-death experience in a medevac plane crash. This is a small twin propeller plane called a Piper Aztec. That's the type of plane that I was in when we were in the plane crash. This was in Ontario. So you guys, I think most of you are in New York. So we're just a little bit north of you. And this was in winter. I was in a medevac, and the plane crashed. We flew into bad weather, into a blizzard. We crashed into a semi-frozen lake, and then the plane sank. And as the plane was going down, like first one propeller stopped, then the other propeller stopped. The inquest they did afterwards and the inquiry said that they thought it was the bad weather made the air filters one after the other freeze up for the two propeller engines. And so as we're going down, no propellers going in strong wind, it was really clear to me we were crashing. And my first immediate reaction, I think, as anyone would, as your plane's crashing to the ground in horrible turbulence, was incredible wave of fear and panic came over me. And out of my heart, it just leapt the thought, oh God, help, I'm going to die. And then that is when my near-death experience actually started. And this was before the plane had crashed. And what happened was all of a sudden, this feeling of peace and calm started descending upon me. It seems like that plea out of my heart was close enough to a prayer, and this divine peace started settling upon me. And then I heard at the same time this clear inner voice, and I'd never heard inner voices before this experience, and it was a masculine inner voice, and it said, "Be still and know that I am God. I am with you now and always." And some of you may recognize those are verses from the Bible, but I was not trying to think of these. The verse spoke these in my consciousness. And as I heard those words, that voice, the peace and sense of divine protection intensified. The plane finally crashed. It sank completely into a semi-frozen lake. There was open water between me and the closest shore, and the inner voice spoke again and said, "Swim to shore." Now, it was a very long and a very difficult swim in the middle of winter, wearing heavy parka, heavy boots, and ice cold water in a storm in order to get to shore. And while I was swimming to shore, when I was partway to shore, was when my near-death experience deepened. And what happened was all of a sudden, I heard this loud inner roaring sound again, similar to like the Kundalini waking, like the roar of a waterfalls. And my consciousness rose up out of my body. But I was not dead. I was still swimming to shore when my consciousness rose up out of my body. So actually, it was that my consciousness was now two places at the same time. And I compare it to, we all now are familiar with split screen TV, where you have a big image and the small image in the corner. That might be how you're seeing me now. And it was like the main part of my consciousness, the big image of my consciousness. Most of my consciousness had risen up out of my body, but it's still a small part of my consciousness at the same time was still in my physical body that was desperately trying to swim to shore. And then what happened is that that main part of my consciousness that was above my body rose higher. And I entered this realm that was filled with powerful, 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 unconditional love and beautiful white light. And my soul instantly recognized that this love that I was feeling was the love of the higher power, or what I had been raised to call God. And what I was actually experiencing God, our higher power, to be was not anything like what I had been taught in my Christian upbringing of an old man with a long white beard sitting on a throne, judging you, you've been good or bad. No, that was not at all what I was actually experiencing. What I was actually experiencing was that our higher power, God, is this infinite force field, infinitely intelligent, infinitely present, past, present, future, of unconditional love. And I felt completely loved, completely at home, that all was right with the universe. And somehow, when I was there basking in that love, feeling the presence and safety of the higher power, loving me and loving everyone, I knew that my soul, or what I think of as me, would live on, whether my body lived or died in that plane crash scenario that was happening down below. And I also knew that that was true for everyone, that we all live on after our souls die and exit our physical body. And I could speak more about my understandings there, but we have lots that I'd like to talk to you about today. Feel free to ask me questions at the end if you have more questions about what I experienced on the other side. Anyway, I remained sort of in that split screen scenario with most of my consciousness above my body in the light and a tiny little bit of my consciousness in my physical body that did manage to swim to shore through a whole series of miracles or coincidences, depending how you want to frame it. I call it miracles. We were rescued by helicopter, ferried to the closest hospital. I watched from above as the helicopter landed on the driveway of the hospital, and they brought out stretchers, put me on a stretcher, wheeled me in, and they resuscitated me because when I was brought to hospital, I was probably unconscious. I don't know. I wasn't there in physical form to label myself, but I was hypothermic. So I was a near drowning victim and I was almost frozen to death. My body temperature was incredibly low. So they resuscitated me by putting me in the hot water of the whirlpool baths in the physiotherapy department. And then when I was submerged in that hot water and my body temperature came back up, that is when my consciousness re-entered my body. And what that experience was like, it was really sudden, and it felt like I was sucked back into my body through the top of my head, sort of like how they depict a genie being sucked into a bottle from this big, expansive place up above. Suddenly I was sucked down and I was back in my body again. Now, this experience had tremendous after effects on me. It took me years to be able to even find the label to know that it was called a near-death experience, but I now know it was a near-death experience, and that it had profound and immediate after effects on me. And one of them was my spiritual focus increased dramatically. I mean, when I came back from this near-death experience, I picked up my Bible, and first thing I did, I was searching intently, trying to find those verses in the Bible that had been recited to me. I found them in the Psalms. And but then I had like this hunger to read the Bible, and I started reading the Bible every day, not because someone was telling me to. It was like my soul wanted to. I had this new spiritual hunger, this spiritual thirst, pardon my twisting my words there. But the other things started happening. I also completely lost my fear of death through this experience. And interestingly enough, I told you about the Kundalini awakening I had a few years before this. I had an increase in my Kundalini sensations, my chakra sensations, the energetic sensations in my body after this near-death experience. And a few weeks after the plane crash near-death experience, I had a psychic awakening, which continued and accelerated. I started having clairvoyant experiences, clairaudient experiences. I became very clairsentient, or an empath, so I could sense the emotions and feelings of people around me. So I struggled for many years trying to find names for these experiences. I didn't even have a vocabulary. And as a medical doctor, by this time I'd finished my training. I became a practicing medical doctor in Toronto. I became on faculty at the University of Toronto. And so accurate diagnosis is very important to a medical doctor. You want to find the right name to understand it. And I was having great difficulty finding an accurate name for these experiences. I mean, some people said maybe they were hallucinations, but I absolutely knew that near-death experience and what I'd experienced, which I now know was a Kundalini awakening, were not hallucinations. These were very real. They were very powerful. They had a very spiritual impact on me, a positive spiritual impact. So for many years, I led a double life. So on the outside, I was a traditional trained medical doctor, and I taught at the University of Toronto. But on the inside, in the closet, I was on an intense spiritual search, trying to understand what had happened to me. Well, in 1990, I had the great opportunity of meeting Dr. Kenneth Ring, who is one of the founders of the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And I told him about my plane crash experience. And, I was much, much younger than him, sort of with wobbly knees. I said to him, I think it was a near-death experience, although I was never dead. And he burst out laughing and he said, yes, Yvonne, it was a near-death experience, but you're what we call an outlier on the NDE bell curve. And I went, outlier on the NDE bell curve. So what is an outlier on the NDE bell curve? So some of you might be familiar with this concept of the bell curve, and it's from statistics. So what they consider sort of average is in the realm that is purple, is where you have the most common symptoms, experiences, etc. And then you have less common, but still considered normal in the green zone on either side. But then you have the little yellow zone where things are less typical in both directions. That's still considered normal, but they are called outliers. So they're less common. So it's less common for people to have a near-death experience the way I did, that started when the plane was coming down. But it's still included in the bell curve of variations of near-death experience. So this was very affirming to me. And with that, and with some other experiences that I'm not going to talk about today, in 1990, I made the personal and professional decision to come out of the closet. So that's when I became the first Canadian medical doctor to publicly specialize in researching and counseling patients who'd had near-death experiences and other sorts of spiritual experiences. And I coined this term, spiritually transformative experiences, in my talks and books. And here I started writing books. So here you can see the first two books I wrote about spiritually transformative experiences, where I defined them. So what are spiritually transformative experiences? So I defined this as an umbrella term that would be broad and inclusive for a wide range of spiritual and paranormal experiences that people were actually having. And I wanted there to be a word that did not make it sound like it's a disease or a mental illness, but actually something healthy, something positive. And this is the term that I came up with, spiritually transformative experiences. And I've been writing about it in my books since 1993. I'm actually delighted this term has now caught on, and many people around the world are now using this because they find they fit under this big umbrella term. But all these different diverse types of spiritually transformative experiences, they have some similarities. That's why they fit under the same umbrella, because they all seem to either cause a spiritual awakening in people, if it's maybe early on in their spiritual awakening journey, or confirm, intensify, renew their spiritual awakening as they're having more of these experiences over the course of their lifetime. And all spiritually transformative experiences in my research and in my own personal experiences and the thousands of patients and friends and colleagues I've talked to over the years, they have similar after effects, no matter what type of spiritually transformative experience you had as your first or main type of experience. So, what are the types of spiritually transformative experiences? I define them into six main subtypes. So, and I found that as I was looking for different ways to understand these experiences, that yoga had a good vocabulary and good explanations that helped me to understand and integrate. So I sometimes throw in some yogic words and concepts here. Be free to ask me if you're not familiar with some of these concepts. So I labeled one group of spiritually transformative experiences as a broad range of mystical experiences, which are called samadhis in yoga. And mystical experiences can be of many, many types. And in my books, I talk about some of the very different subtypes. We can have mystical visions. We can have unitive experiences. We can have bliss episodes. We can have revelations when we receive divine knowledge. We can have dissolution, I call it, dissolving into the infinite. We can have expansive episodes. There are many types of mystical experiences, experiences of the divine peace, experiences of the divine love, experiences of the divine wisdom. These are all like little facets, little glimpses of aspects of the divine that occur in mystical experiences, many, many types. These are the most transformative and life-changing type of spiritually transformative experiences, are mystical experiences or samadhis. Then we have another category, which are called psychic or intuitive experiences, which are called siddhis in yoga. And there are many of these. We'll talk a bit more about them later on, but basically all of the clairs, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, past life recall, telepathy, mediumship, after death communication, these would all be psychic or intuitive experiences. Then we have the kundalini or Holy Spirit or Shekinah experiences. These are spiritual energy awakenings that are actually known within the mystical traditions of most of the world's great faiths, but using different vocabularies. In yoga, they are called Kundalini awakenings, and many people today are using that vocabulary. So that's the vocabulary I'll be using. The fourth subtype of spiritually transformative experiences is the near-death experience, which I'm going to talk about in detail during this talk today. And then the fifth type is other death-related STEs. And these can be things like end-of-life experiences when people have very powerful, perhaps visions of saints from their spiritual tradition, or seeing across the veil to relatives who've passed in the past when they are close to their own death. So end-of-life experiences. Also, we have shared death experiences or death watch experiences that happen to the living at the moment that a loved one dies. And then we have after death communications, a very other common one. And then the sixth group is inspired creativity and genius. Now, as we mentioned in the introduction, I have had 5 near-death experiences over the course of my lifetime. And each of these pictures is depicting a bit about my near-death experience. That I had 2 as a child. So the bottom left-hand corner, I had one at about the age of 5 when I was almost hit by a train. And the one above that, I had one at the age of 11 when I was in a car accident and unconscious in a coma for 3 days. And both of those were out-of-body type of near-death experiences. The one in the middle, you've seen that picture before, was the plane crash medevac near-death experience that I had when I was 23. And then the upper right-hand corner with the tunnel and light, the blue image, I had one in my around the age of 40, which was my fourth near-death experience where I did have a tunnel and experience the light. And then the bottom right-hand corner is my most recent near-death experience that happened in 2003. And I'm going to share it where I saw beings of light on the other side. And I'm going to share that story with you now. So in 2003, I went to visit Niagara Falls, which some of you have probably seen. I was on the Canadian side of Niagara Falls, and I slipped on black ice, fell back, hit my head on the rock cobblestone pavement, suffered a serious traumatic brain injury with a brain hemorrhage, and I died. And instantly what happened is I felt my spirit pulled out of my body by a force greater than myself, and I was being rushed up through, it was evening, dark evening sky, up towards this entranceway of light, up to the white light realm. And when I arrived at the white light realm, there were two beings of light radiating light in their light bodies at the entranceway as if they were welcoming me. Well, they were welcoming me. And I instantly recognized them. They were two saints from my spiritual tradition, Paramahansa Yogananda and Mahavatar Babaji, in their light bodies. And they telepathically communicated to me. And it was telepathically explained to me that my physical body had died, that my work in the incarnation as Dr. Yvonne Kason was now completed. And there was this feeling of joy, feeling of love, feeling of celebration. There were many other souls there in the light, but these were the only two whose identity was made clear to me. And much happened in the white light realm, but I'm going to just point out some of the key points so we can move on to the other things I'd like to share with you today. But while I was in this white light realm on the other side, it was like my consciousness capacity expanded dramatically while I was in this state of feeling bliss, God communion, divine love, all of this at the same time. But the capacity of my consciousness to absorb vast amounts of information all at once was incredibly marked. And all of a sudden, I remembered, like as if you have a memory disk that had been unplugged, and all of a sudden, as the memory chip is plugged in again, suddenly I remembered all of my past lives. And it was all at once. It happened all at once, not in a linear fashion. It's like my brain had the capacity to assimilate vast amounts of information all at once. And it was an incredibly beautiful, healing, positive experience because it was finally I knew who I was from the context of many, 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 many lifetimes. It's like, aha, yes, this is who I am. This is my little dot in the big cosmic plan, but this would be me. So it was a profoundly beautiful experience. And I remained on the other side for what seemed like timeless time. And I just want to mention here that while on the other side, there was a clear awareness of time passing differently. I was aware that I could perceive what we here on Earth see as the past, or what we here on Earth perceive as the present, or what we here on Earth perceive as the future, by simply shifting the focus of my consciousness. But at the same time, it was almost as if they were all happening at the same time from the perspective of the other side. But at the same time, I had a very clear understanding that when we're incarnated in physical form, that's not how we experience time. We experience time linearly. And then after a period of timeless time in this state of ecstasy, divine ecstasy, the two beings of light reappeared to me and telepathically told me that I could now choose whether or not to reincarnate as a baby to further serve the divine, and or to go back to the injured form. And my heart was just wide open in the ecstatic bliss that I was living in on the other side. It actually felt like the response came out of my heart rather than out of some part of the mind. And it felt like my heart was responding, and my heart responded, "Oh, masters, please guide me. What is the higher choice? I want to do God's will." And they so lovingly, telepathically communicated to me, it will be more difficult, but to return to the maimed body. And instantly, I was not shown anything. I did not know shown what would be more difficult, but instantly, without hesitation, my heart responded, I accept. And woof, faster than the speed of thought, suddenly there I was back in my previously dead body, breathing life into it. But I woke up in a body with a traumatic brain injury that was disabling. I was disabled afterwards. I went to neuro rehab for years and years and saw all the best specialists and did traditional therapies and all the complementary therapies you can think of, cleanses and detoxes, you name it. I did it trying to get better. But I was disabled. I was carrying this heavy burden of the physical disability. So slowly I had to accept that my worldly life was over and that now I was a person disabled with traumatic brain injury. But right when you think you know what God's plan is, God's got a surprise for you. So in 2016, so that's more than 12 years after my traumatic brain injury, I had a miracle happen to me. It happened to me while I was meditating in Encinitas, California, in a holy spot, a spot where Paramahansa Yogananda used to meditate and go into samadhi. Has strong spiritual vibrations, which is why I was meditating there. And while I was deep in meditation, I inwardly experienced this eruption of liquid light in the center of my brain. And the subjective feeling when I inwardly saw this burst of light was of waking up. And my brain was healed. And I was given the very strong inner message, pass on what you have learned. So I was offline for 12 years for refurbishment, but now I'm back. So now I'm going to focus on newest near-death experience discoveries as I'm passing on what I've learned. So what is a near-death experience? I'm sure you've probably covered this in your OLLI course, hopefully. If not, well, I'll refresh you. So it was a term first coined by Dr. Raymond Moody 50 years ago in 1975. And it's an experience that happens to people when they're clinically dead, then resuscitated, or when they're very close to death, is how he first defined it. And he defined certain features of a near-death experience, which are very true to this day. So I'm just going to go through them because they're old knowledge. We've known about it for 50 years. So that the experience is beyond words. It's very experiential, as are all mystical experiences. There's an auditory awareness where people can hear what's being said around their dead or unconscious body, that there's a strong feeling of peace. Any fear or pain is taken away. There may be unusual inner sounds, like I heard the roaring sound in mine. Many people have an out-of-body experience, going out of body. They may go up a dark space or tunnel, as I told you I did in my one when I was 40. They may meet departed spirits, as I did. They enter the white light realm, some of them. There may be a life review. They might encounter a life barrier or be given a choice whether or not to return. When they do return, it's an abrupt return to their body, which was true for me in both of those NDEs I shared with you. Afterwards, people are convicted of the reality. They know the experience was real, even though people tell them they imagined it. It's a hallucination, has a powerful transformational impact. People lose their fear of death, and there's independent corroboration. That means things they saw while out of body are later corroborated. So these are the features of near-death experiences first defined 50 years ago, and they're true to this day. Now, what we now know is that actually near-death experiences have been reported for centuries, not just 50 years. Here's an image from Hieronymus Bosch, Ascent of the Blessed from the 1500s, which very clearly looks like people going up a tunnel into the light, which is what people see in their near-death experiences. So, what are some of our newest near-death experience discoveries? This is what I'm going to share now. First off, we now know that near-death experiences are one subtype of this umbrella of spiritually transformative experiences. And I've been writing this in my books now for over 30 years. Also, the definition of near-death experiences has expanded, and we now know it's an out-of-body and or white light mystical experience. So that means it's a type of STE, and we know it happens to people when they're close to dead or clinically dead and resuscitated. But we also know now that it happens to people when they're facing imminent death or severe trauma, like what happened to me. I was facing death when the plane went down, and that is when my near-death experience started. We also now know that there are different types of near-death experiences, and I define them into three distinct categories. So the first type of near-death experience is the out-of-body type of near-death experience. And so for some near-death experiencers, this is their entire experience where they are dead, unconscious, or having serious health problems, and they find themselves out of body, usually often floating above their body, looking down and accurately observing what's happening. Sometimes they're beside their body or at the head of their body. Other times it seems like they float to maybe another room in the hospital where their loved ones are and they observe accurately what their loved ones are doing. Some people even float out of body to a different location. Maybe their loved ones are at home still and they can see what their loved ones are doing at home. But there's a second type. The second type is what we call the deeper near-death experience, which is the mystical or white light experience. And it can start with that out-of-body experience, but then move on into the white light realm, the mystical experience, as I described in both of my NDEs that I shared with you. But there is a third type of NDE that we now realize, and that's what we call the distressing near-death experience. And in my work, there are I label three distinct categories of the distressing near-death experience. And the first one is people who are fighting the NDE pull that is trying to take them out of body into the light. This might be somebody who, I heard this from a Holocaust survivor. She was floating out of her body. She had witnessed both her mother and her father die in the Holocaust, and she in the concentration camp, and she did not want to die. And so as she was being pulled out of her body, she said it was like desperately, desperately, desperately trying to get back into her body. She was, I'm not going to die. 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 And people have told me, and she told me, it's like swimming against a strong current or undertow, so the experience itself was not distressing, but the fight against going out of body was what made it distressing to the person. And they remember this as a distressing experience because of how much they had to fight to get back into their body. They didn't want to die. A second type of distressing near-death experience is what I call the low astral near-death experience. Now, in yoga and Buddhism and some of the Eastern traditions, it is understood that there are many different layers of astral planes. And if you think of it like layers of the ocean, where the layers close to the top have lots of light, and then there are ones in the middle with less light, and very, very deep layers are dark. And similarly, there are astral planes like that. And that if we are blessed, when we leave our body in a near-death experience, we will go to the high astral planes, the ones that are full of light, but that some people might just linger around our astral plane, which is medium, and they're having the out-of-body experience. But some people, it seems, go to lower astral planes where they encounter dark entities or tormenting entities. Many have reported this. And some people have a combination of they've seen the lower astral, but they made it up to the heavenly realms. And then there's a third category of distressing near-death experiences, which I call the nightmare-like distortions. And they're sort of like hallucinogenic, weird, strange. And I wonder if this might have to do with drugs that are in the body at the time that the person is close to death, causing these nightmare-like distortions. We now know the frequency of near-death experiences, that Dr. Pim van Lommel, Dutch cardiologist, did an excellent study in 2001, cardiac arrest patients. But interestingly, only 1 in 8 reported a near-death experience when they were clinically dead and then resuscitated. So 7 of 8 did not. And in terms of people having facing death, near-death experiences, we really don't have any statistics on that. Now, I'd like to now go into some of the new paradoxes that we're discovering about near-death experiences. So one of the things that we're discovering now is that there are time paradoxes in near-death experiences. And time can bend during near-death experiences. That some people say their near-death experiences begins before their trigger event. Now mine, the plane was coming down, I was facing death, but there are other people, they don't even realize that something's going to happen to them in an hour or 2 hours, and they start having their near-death experience or out-of-body experience before they're even aware that a trigger event's going to happen. And other people can have a classic near-death experience and near-death after effects that start after the event is finished. So it's as if time doesn't always line up exactly with near-death experiences. And I look at these as the time outliers, where some people are on the bell curve over here, where their near-death experience actually starts before their near-death event, and then others whose near-death experience happens after their near-death event. Another time paradox we're discovering with near-death experiences is that, as I mentioned, past, present, and future seems to coexist on the other side, and that some NDEers can have a life review where it seems that they're reviewing or re-experiencing events that happened in their life in the past already, in this particular incarnation. But other people have had life previews where they've seen events that have not yet happened in this life that will eventually happen to them. There's something also we're now discovering about memory paradoxes with near-death experiences, that for some reason, the memory of near-death experiences is etched into people's memory. There's an unusually clear recall. Like if you ask me, what did I have for breakfast 40 years ago? I mean, I don't have a clue unless I ate the same breakfast every day for 40 years. But I can very clearly recall my near-death experience from 40 years ago. And that's true not just of me, but of near-death experiencers. The other thing we're now discovering with near-death experiences is that the memory of these experiences can come back in chunks. It doesn't necessarily all come back at once. And some people find that they even need to go see a therapist or a hypnotherapist in order to unblock some or all of their near-death experience memories. But once it comes back, they remember it. There's also this bilocation paradox that consciousness can be at 2 places at the same time. And I have had near-death experiencers tell me after they've heard me talk about it, because, I experienced it in the plane crash NDE, being 2 places at once, that they had their consciousness 3 places at once. I've had someone say that even more places at the same time during their near-death experience. We also now realize and have heard stories of many physical paradoxes that have happened during near-death experiences, and a lot of them are involving car accidents. And people have told me that it seemed as if their car somehow mysteriously, mystically drove through another vehicle, and they're on the other side. They had their near-death experience while the car was somehow magically driving through. I've heard other people say that their car somehow jumped over an oncoming vehicle or something that was they were going to T-bone. And others have told me that inexplicably, somehow the car they're about to hit in the last minute suddenly moved out of the way and avoided the mishap. So there are all sorts of physical paradoxes happening with NDEs. And we now know, as I was mentioning earlier, you don't have to be dead to have a near-death experience. Facing imminent death, like people on the battlefield, grenade lands in front of you, you think you're going to die, You go into a full-blown near-death experience, but the grenade never goes off. Car accidents, near-miss car accidents, being shot at but missed, facing any sort of imminent trauma. Also during severe illnesses, having a high fever, being really sick with COVID, some people had it, being in a coma, being under anesthesia. So you don't have to be dead to have a near-death experience. We now know also that anyone can have a near-death experience. They've been reported by people all over the planet. They might interpret it differently depending on their religion of upbringing or their culture, but if you look at the core elements of the near-death experience, very, very similar to anyone all over the world. We now also know that near-death experiences happen at all ages, so that people have memories of having a near-death experience in the womb before they were born, during birth, during their time of birth, at any time in childhood, adults, of course, of all ages, and also even shortly before death. And a new thing we are also now seeing is that a non-NDE brush with death can also be transforming. This causes a little bit of confusion. This is the Grim Reaper brushing his teeth with somebody, and it's called a brush with death. So that would not be a near-death experience because he's not having a mystical or out-of-body experience. Um, but some people will have close calls. Like, I'll give you an example of this. One person says, "Oh, I had a really powerful near-death experience." And I go, "Great, tell me the story." And so she said she was driving along a freeway, and I think it was in California, and it was about to be, somebody jumped the meridian or something. She was about to have a head-on accident, but for some reason, in the last minute, that car pulled away, and so she just kept on driving, and so she was not hurt. Well, when she got home afterwards and she started reflecting about it, it was incredibly spiritually transformative to her. She started saying, there must be a God. This must have been a miracle. It was like a spiritual renewal for her, and it was very transforming for her. Although nothing happened to her, she was not close to death, but it was sort of a brush. She was close. And afterwards, the reflection upon it, she was very transformed. So I include these people. I now call it spiritually transformative life events that there are other life events that can be very, very transforming, and a non-NDE brush with death is one of them. We now also realize that near-death experiences can cause a Kundalini awakening. Several researchers have talked about this, including myself. And if a person already has a Kundalini awakening and they have a near-death experience, it will often accelerate the Kundalini process. And the yogic model of a near-death experience, for those of you who are not familiar with the yogic model, is that at death or near death, what is said to happen according to yoga is our soul, which is encased in our astral body and causal body, which is our energy body and our consciousness body, leaves the physical body by going up the astral spine. And that at the time that this happens, as the soul is ascending the astral spine, the Kundalini might awaken. And the soul, after it exits the body, according to yoga, where the soul goes is either to astral heavens, if that vibrationally is what fits for that particular soul, or may go to other astral planes that are fitting for where that soul is in its spiritual development. And according to the yogic model, Paramahansa Yogananda talked about this, that many people either have a very transient experience in the astral heaven and then enter what is called the great sleep between incarnations, or some people may go directly into the great sleep. And I find this helpful because it helps us to understand why some people who are clinically dead and resuscitated say, no, it's like I was asleep. That according to yoga, yes, that does happen to some people after death. Now, another new thing we are learning now in the recent years is that after having one near-death experience, many people become multiple near-death experiencers like me. I've now had 5. Back in the 70s, it was thought that people just had one and that impacted you for the rest of your life. Now we know Many people are having multiple NDEs. I actually think that having one NDE makes you more susceptible or open to having future near-death experiences because those channels are already open in your consciousness. And interestingly enough, you may not have the same type of near-death experience as a multiple NDE experiencer. Some people report, well, one of their near-death experiences was an out-of-body type, another of their near-death experience was a mystical one and a light, yet another one was a distressing near-death experience. So there can be a mixture of different types of near-death experiences in the multiple NDE experiencer. Another thing we're now discovering that after a near-death experience, many NDEers become multiple STE experiencers. They start having multiple types of spiritually transformative experiences and also repeated or ongoing spiritually transformative experiences. So it just becomes a part of their life. Another new thing, but actually this has been written about for about 30 years, but we're now talking about this more openly, is that near-death experiencers are more open to trans-dimensional types of STEs. So they're more open to things like seeing angels, encounters with trans-dimensional UFOs, UFO experiences, communication with beings that seem to be living in other dimensions. So this is all more common in near-death experiencers. And now we've also learned a lot about children's near-death experiences that often, that's me when I was about 5 years old, 5 or 6 years old. Often children do not realize it was a near-death experience until they're an adult. And that was true for me. I didn't realize till about 8 years ago that my experiences at 5 and 11 were actually near-death experiences because I didn't label it as paranormal, which is typical for a child. It was just what I experienced. And children's NDEs, PMH Atwater's done a lot of research on this. They tend to have fewer NDE features. But children's NDEs do have definite after effects. Many childhood NDEers see spirits. That was true of me. After my 11-year-old one, I saw spirits for almost a year afterwards. They're very curious about God. They may be psychic and more intuitive than the average with premonitions. They may be gifted, highly creative, and then later on in their life have more NDEs and STEs. There are many physical NDE after effects. I'm going to be wrapping up soon. That NDEers tend to be more sensitive than the average person to just about everything: chemicals, medications, bright lights, loud noises, scents, others' energies. There are biorhythm changes like middle of the night wakening, food cravings, food aversions. But I really like this one. Electromagnetic sensitivity is a physical NDE after effect that has two aspects. That NDEers, it seems like their aura or their energy can disrupt electronic equipment. And so NDEers very commonly will make computers fritz out, microphones stop working, microwaves malfunction, airport detectors not work, light bulbs pop, electronic locks jam or not lock. I've had many of these, but many NDE experiencers can tell you humorous stories about how their energy field is disrupting things. But there's another aspect to this electromagnetic sensitivity, which is that NDEers are also more sensitive to external electromagnetic fields. So NDEers will tell you that for example, some people can't stand a laser even in front of them, that they feel the electromagnetic impulse, or high energy power lines, electrical lines, that they can't go close. They feel the electromagnetic field, or these new towers, what are they, 5G or whatever, that they actually feel a physical discomfort from these electromagnetic fields. But NDEs also have strong psychological after effects, that they push people to grow up, and people start getting rid of some of their self-destructive habits, whether it be overeating or lack of exercise or smoking, and they start embracing their recovery work, their inner healing work. And then another thing happens, which is that memories, starting with this life usually, that have been repressed, that need to be healed, start spontaneously surfacing for healing. And it often starts with this lifetime, but many NDEers find past life memories also start surfacing for healing. And psychic after effects, every psychic ability you can think of can be an after effect after a near death experience. But also, and this is talked about less frequently, many have inspired creative NDE after effects with marked increase in creativity. They might develop new creative abilities. They might suddenly start drawing poetry, doing poetry, suddenly having the urge to do art and actually doing pretty good art, or suddenly playing music or writing music, suddenly writing books, getting downloads of understanding. Spiritually, of course, we know with NDEs, there's an increased spiritual focus, and people need more time in prayer, in meditation, in journaling, on retreats, and they desire to live a more moral life. And it comes from the inside. They develop more conservative or traditional moral values. They want to live, for example, by the 10 commandments, and they start striving to live their life in accordance with these moral codes. But well, before we wrap, I want to mention that there are also some challenging NDE after effects. There can be difficulties with relationships because the person who's had the near-death experience, and this is true of many other powerful STEs as well, they're changing in their views, they're changing in their focus, they're changing in their values. And this can be challenging in relationships if their partner or family members or friends are not changing in the same direction they are. People can feel isolated, that there's nobody they feel safe to talk to about their experiences. They can have confusion or anxiety, particularly if they've not yet found an accurate label for their experiences or a community of other people who are having similar experiences. They may have a great fear of being labeled as crazy, so they feel a need to live in the closet. And they also can have an increase of stress because they're now recalling traumatic memories from their childhood, which can be quite stressful. Maybe they didn't realize they were sexually abused as a child, and now they're remembering that. So, there could be challenges related to that. And others are just very sad at the end of the NDE bliss and joy because it's so much nicer on the other side than what they're come back to here. We now know the spiritual awakening process after near-death experience is a long-term process. It goes on for your whole lifetime, as it does with anyone's spiritual awakening. And there are many levels of growth and deepening. So in conclusion, what have I learned from my 5 near-death experiences and 40 years of NDE and STE research? Well, I have learned that absolutely 100% God, the higher power, exists, and that the nature of our higher power is profound love. Secondly, that we are all immortal souls. After death of our physical body, we will live on in other dimensions, and then we will reincarnate. And meditation and right living, according to the moral codes of conduct, are the keys to growing spiritually, to expanding our consciousness, and finding our way home. And I'm going to end with this quote from Paramahansa Yogananda: "The purpose of life is to find God." And these are my 2 books. This is Spiritual Awakenings International. My organization, we're hosting events twice a month. Please check us out. With that, I'll stop screen sharing and I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Wow. Oh, that was wonderful. Yvonne, that was incredible. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Mm,
much for all of that. What beautiful work you're doing in the world. I'm so glad
thank you.
I'm so glad you had that healing.
God's plan.
God's plan. Absolutely.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so there were there were a few different things that I starred that I would like to ask you before we move on and ask if anybody else has any questions. And if you have a question, I'm just going to ask that you raise your hand and then I'll call on you and I will put you in the room here and then you can ask your question. Okay, but I'm going to ask a couple questions first. So, you had talked about time and how time kind of works differently with NDEs, with some NDE experiences. And sometimes people can have these experiences before the event
Mhm,
happens, right? Or after the event.
mhm,
And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, and it's a term that I learned about over the last couple of years that I didn't know I experienced until, I started, hearing the term in sharing groups, is shared death experience.
mhm.
Um, have you found that people that have had shared death experiences with a relative or someone that is crossing over, have you found that time can also, do different types of things where you're having that experience before the actual event, like what would happen in an NDE, but it's happening through an SDE?
Yes, 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 and yes. So that would be your answer. So let me just talk a little bit about that. Um, I use the term death watch experiences for the cluster of experiences, STEs, that happen to people, a living person at the time that somebody they love dies. And or it can be not necessarily someone you love, but you're at their bedside. You're at the bedside of somebody at the moment of death. That there's something, it's like the veils part or something at the moment of death. So like nurses at the bedside, or you're supporting a friend at the bedside of somebody you don't even know. Um, Similarly, I've heard stories of when saints have died, being at the bedside of someone who's very spiritually advanced, or a saint maybe a number of people were praying around that person's bedside, and at their moment of death, it's like they all have a mystical experience. It's like there was this wave of God that came through, right, like a portal opened at the moment of the person's death. More common would be things like I call a shared death experience. I talk about this quite extensively. I've been talking in my books for 25 years. I've been talking about it. Um, I call a shared death experience when a person actually is sharing in the crossing over. And that sometimes happens. Like one person told me she was holding her husband's hand while he was passing. And all of a sudden, she found herself out of body, still holding her husband's hand. And the two of them were going up a tunnel towards the light, and she was looking up at the light and he was looking up at the light. And then all of a sudden, she said it was like she hit some sort of force field. She couldn't keep going, but her husband continued going up into the light. And, he turned and looked at her, smiled, and then he went up in the light. And then suddenly she found herself regaining awareness that she was at his bedside holding his hand and he had died. So she had actually shared in his crossing over. Um, More common are different variations, and I call them the death watch. I experienced when my own mother died. I was sitting at her bedside and I was holding her hand and I was reading to her from the Bible and I was singing to her. I was singing The Lord is my shepherd, actually, when at the moment of her death, I was holding her hand. And all of a sudden, I got a vision. And what I saw my mom's spirit out of body, and she didn't look like, she was old when she died, but she looked young, like she was like 25 or something like that, and she looked beautiful, and she looked like she was in a ball gown ready to go to a dance. She and my father used to love to go to dances when they were younger. They just, something they did. My dad died many years earlier, and my dad was there, and he looked young and he was beautiful and radiant, and it was like that scene from Titanic where he was waiting for her, and the two of them went into the light together. And then it was like, oh my God, my vision ended. And I'm still holding my mother's hand, but she was in the hospital and I saw the monitor, it was flatline. And so I knew that I had, although I didn't share in the experience, I had witnessed the experience. And other people, I just want to mention some of the common ones is that some people will have the person come to them in a dream right around the time of their death. Yeah. And other people tell me they saw the person's face in a mirror. They were looking in a mirror and all of a sudden they saw the person's face. And that generally happens right at the time the person dies. Now, that being said, can it happen sometimes shortly before they die? Can it sometimes happen shortly after they die? Yes.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, that's awesome. And also I want to ask one more thing and then I'll get to the raised hands. You were talking about people that have awarenesses when there's a brush with death. Then they open up to a more spiritual side of themselves and they realize there is a God or there's more to this life than we realize. What I'm wondering is, I've heard people that have opened up to having their own STEs just by listening to others that have
Yes.
had STEs, and and then all of a sudden it opens them up to now they're
Yep.
having STEs.
Exactly. So you're previewing my book that I'm working on right now. My new
Okay.
book, I'm going to be talking about that. I came up with a whole new category calling them spiritually transforming life events.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's exactly what you said, just listening, like people maybe listening to my near death experience story or listening to your spiritual awakening story, that they've said that going online, everyone's going online now, going online and listening to NDE experiencer stories or other spiritual awakening stories was what awakened them. And I mean, recently, for example, I'm not going to be political. I'm just saying this spiritually. There was that really inspiring funeral service for Charlie Kirk, where they were like thousands of people that are now having what they call spiritual renewal because of this event. And so there are other things that can stimulate people into having a spiritual awakening, spiritual renewal, and it can be a close brush with death. It can be an inspiring event like that funeral, or it can be listening to other spiritual awakening stories. And I'm of course very, very deeply touched by what's happening in Israel and the release of the hostages and all of that. And I'm sure with time, we're going to start hearing stories. I mean, I saw one story online this morning where one of the hostages said that the only thing that kept him going at one point was he just kept repeating the word God, 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 God,
Wow.
God. And I mean, that's a horrible way to have a profound spiritual awakening experience, but I mean, there can be so many diverse triggers to a spiritual awakening. Mhm.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for that. Um, all right. I am going to bring Rabbi David.
Thank you for that. I've had many experiences. I don't know if you call them near death, where I should have passed. One of them, I had a fractured skull when I was 8 years old, knocked by a car into a pole. And there was once I had a cardiac arrest in a doctor's office. But what I just want to discuss, I was being prepped for heart surgery with my family around me. And all of a sudden, they gave me morphine to prepare me. I went off the screen. I was like out of things. They rushed my family out of the room, and it was I survived. There were various other things. My question is this: from what you've described, I'm not sure that I had some of these experiences, but my question is: under hypnosis, can a person be called back to that moment that they
Yes,
believe had this, and then say, "Wow, I did have these experiences," and I'm
yes.
really wondering about that
Yes,
because
absolutely. There have been documented cases where people they had a feeling something happened when, and often it's with medical procedures. So you wonder, did all of the drugs interfere with my memory? Is that why I don't remember it? And so they go to see a hypnotherapist, and that under hypnosis, they have been able to recall that they did have an out of body experience. So maybe you did, and you just don't remember it at this point. Mhm.
one more thing, I'm sorry, as far as transforming, shortly after that, it was I decided at that point that if I survive this whole thing, I am going to do more charitable work and become a rabbi. I had decided at that point that it helped me, and I decided that this was a transforming experience. Maybe
So
the
it
others
was
were
for you a transforming experience, whether we call it an NDE or not. For
right.
you, it was a spiritually transforming life event. Yes.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I don't want to take up any more time. Let
Oh,
somebody get on.
nothing to
That's
be
Thank
sorry, but yes.
you
oh,
for what
that's
you're
great.
doing. It's clarified a lot of things. Thank you.
Yes. Wonderful.
Wonderful.
Thank you. That was a great question too about hypnosis. Thank you. All right. Would anybody else like to ask a question? comments, insights, anything you learned that was important to you?
Beth has her hand up.
Beth.
Yes, I have a question. Are you familiar with the book Many Lives, Many Masters?
I've never read it, but many people have told me about it.
Because a lot of things you say remind me of that. The fact that there's these other levels and there are these masters, and you really live each life to improve your chances of going to a higher level, a higher astral plane, as you called it. And it made so much sense to me. It's so easy to believe.
And I mean, I've read this. It's in the yogic tradition, and Paramahansa Yogananda talked about it. And his guru, whose name was Swami Sri Yukteswar, died and resurrected, and reappeared in physical form to Paramahansa Yogananda, and explained many things about the afterlife to Yogananda. So it's in his famous book, Autobiography of a Yogi, if any of you want to read that. But Swami Sri Yukteswar said from the other side, so he was dead, reappearing in physical form, materialized in physical form. And he talked about there being, planets and universes and levels, and that we reincarnate. I mean, God's plan is so beautiful. I mean, from what I saw, which was much less than Swami Sri Yukteswar, I could see in my own near-death experience from all my past lives. It was so clear to me how it was a combination of my soul learning and having the experiences that I needed to learn, but also I was being put in places for assignments. Like, Yvonne, you got some work to do here. We're sticking you here for a while. Because and so it's a mixture. God's plan is really, really beautiful. And but that according to Swami Sri Yukteswar, we have a certain amount of learning, shall we call it, soul learning, that is best done when we're incarnated in the physical form, and which is why we incarnate lifetime after lifetime, in order to learn these lessons that are best learned in physical form. But according to Swami Sri Yukteswar, that after we've learned all of the lessons that are required to be learned at the physical form, that we still have astral desires and astral learnings that we have to do. And so we incarnate on astral planets in order to do our astral learning. And that probably has to do with, I don't know, emotional desires or something like that. I really don't know enough to say it. And that finally, after we've had incarnations, astral incarnations, to do all of our astral soul learning, that then we start in, and astral means that there's still light and energy, there's still visual beauty, and supposedly the astral planets are very, very beautiful. But then we have causal learning, and causal is on the level of pure consciousness, so that there are not visual images anymore. And for us here on the physical plane, this all seems like so far off, but I actually find it really helpful to have that sort of a map of, okay, here we are, we're in grade school. And hopefully we're going to make it to high school, and maybe when, eventually with time, we're going to make it to college and university. So I find it comforting to know that plan.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Beth. All right. Anybody else have any questions here? Maria. Hello, Maria.
Hello. Hi. I was fascinated with everything that everyone said. And Yvonne, I want to ask you, do you have any precognition, or do you have any of those gifts?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And
But it's not under my control.
right.
So I'm at a point on my spiritual journey where I know that God knows more than I do, and God knows better than I do. And so I ask every day to be guided for the best that I should do according to God's will, to clearly guide me. Now, sometimes I am very definitely given precognition. They're very strong, very clear. And usually I cannot share it with other people because it would be just inappropriate and people wouldn't accept it. And so I've come to understand that it's on a need to know basis. So that if spirit wants me to know something for whatever reason that spirit knows, I don't necessarily know why I need to know it, but I figure, okay, there's a reason I need to know this, and that's why I'm being shown this before it actually happens.
I just
get-
wondered, because you also mentioned that the people around you probably have to do an adjustment from the person you were to the person you are now. But that's like everything. I mean, if you're an alcoholic and you give up drinking, sometimes the people around you have difficulty with that. So
Exactly.
so how do you, I know this is off the beaten track, but I have a friend who has the ability to see certain things that may happen. And I find it difficult to be around her sometimes, but she's been accurate 3 out of 5 times. So I tend to believe her now.
Well, that's why I stopped telling people. I mean, I've had people ask me, and once, my inner guidance is not to tell people, to keep it to myself. But this one friend many years ago was insisting, please tell me, please tell me, please tell me. So I told her, finally, I shouldn't have. I bowed it to peer pressure, which was a learning mistake for me. And I regretted it afterwards. And I have found that that's happened to me subsequently when I bowed to peer pressure when, I was being pressured. So I'm continually having to relearn the lesson to always follow my inner guidance. And I'm hopefully I've learned it now, to not share things if spirit is saying, no, this is for you only.
Thanks.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Thank you, Maria. All right. Well, we are just about at the end.
Oh, Rabbi David's got his hand up.
Rabbi Stephen.
Okay.
Just wanted to say I was born in Montreal. You're born in Toronto. I have a lot of family there. I came here and I became a citizen 5 years and night after I came here. So thank you for what you do. And I know I was, when I had my car accident, I ended up in the Montreal Neurological Institute, and they did a lot of experimenting on me. And that time, Dr. Wilder Penfield was.
My goodness, that's going way back.
I'm sorry, I take the time, but it was very interesting how I ended up there and so forth. So thanks for what you do. Could we get your email? Are we permitted to have your email?
Well, the best way to email me is at Spiritual Awakenings International. Let me just pull that up again for you. I'm going to screen share for a minute.
I appreciate it. I'm sure.
So see spiritualawakeningsinternational.org. So you can email me at info at spiritualawakeningsinternational.org, or you can go to the website and then there's a contact button, contact us. So if you email me there through the contact on our website, you will get to me too.
By the way, are you in Toronto now?
Yes, I am. I'm in Toronto, but I'm a snowbird, and in the winter you'll find me in Bonita Springs, Florida.
We hope the Blue Jays come back and win tonight. I have a lot of people rooting for them if you follow the baseball.
Is that right?
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. And check out Spiritual Awakenings International. It is a wonderful organization. You can find it online. They also have sharing groups once a month, and they have speaker groups once a month. And it is just an amazing organization. So much information is on that website also. So Yvonne, thank you so much. I am so, so blessed to have you here today. And we're all so blessed. And this was a wonderful, wonderful time together. And we all learned so much and got so much out of your talk, your presentation, everything that you shared. Just so appreciate you, Yvonne. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank
God
you,
bless.
Catherine. And thank you for inviting me. And bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. See you next week.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Many
Bye.
blessings. Bye-bye.